idea that this event was going to be a fan favorite with our members, or that the census would be so darn exciting this decade. It has more twists and turns than a telenovela. So I'm Wendy Underhill. I am here with my cat Boudreaux. I can hear him purring. I don't know if you do. You'll probably see him on the screen in a moment. I'm the Director of Elections and Redistricting at NCSL, and he's nothing but my boy. Our audience today includes over 200 people representing 4/5 of the states. Most of you have legislative email addresses, which makes us feel good because it means NCSL is meeting the needs of its members. If any of you, whether you're a member of NCSL or not, would like to be on our redistricting distribution list, you can send an email to elections-info@ncsl.org. We send out, well, it used to be very occasional. Now it's once or twice a week, emails with what's the latest news on redistricting and the census. The census has really been the main thing of late. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers. We have the ever popular James Whitehorn. He is the chief of the Census Bureau's Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office. And that's a nice title, and it's actually pretty accurate. It tells you what he does, but it doesn't capture all that he does. So one way to think about his work is that he is the liaison between redistrictors out in the states, that would be the audience today, and the Census Bureau. So he speaks to us, and internal to the Census Bureau, he speaks for us. We also have Michael Hawes, and he is becoming a regular on the NCSL circuit as well. He's the Bureau's senior advisor for data access and privacy, which means he knows a whole lot about differential privacy. And if you all don't know what that is yet, you're probably going to learn something here. He explains most things very, very well. So feel free to try to stump him with a tough question, and I think he can handle it. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Nancy Potok. Dr. Potok is the chair of the American Statistical Association's 2020 Census Quality Indicators Task Force. And she's a former chief statistician of the United States. Nancy, until I learned your title, I did not know that there was such a thing as a chief statistician. So I'm putting it and poet laureate in a category together as very distinguished posts. Dr. Potok will talk about the task force and the work it's doing on census quality. It feels to me like we've spent so much time talking specifically about deadlines, and James will address that, and about differential privacy, which Michael will address. We're looking to you, Nancy, for taking us above and beyond those two things when it's your turn. And there's one more thing before I turn it over to you, James, and that is, as of yesterday, Christy Zamarripa, Ben Williams, and I, who are your redistricting team at NCSL, decided we're going to move that meeting from August to July for redistricting. The dates will be the 14th, 15th, and 16th. It's still in Salt Lake City. We changed the dates because we feel like there's enough uncertainty about when the census data will be arriving for redistricting purposes, and we want to be in front of it. So we moved it up a few weeks, and there've been some sighs of relief. And if you have other than sighs of relief, please send Christy an email about it. I think it's too late now for us to change our mind about when we're going to do it. All right, James, I'm coming to you. Do you have a big announcement by any chance for us? Because we'd love to have a big announcement from you and then take it from there.
I have about a fifth of a big announcment.
Oh.
But not. I don't have the big announcement that people are looking for today. But let me just get this up here. So I do want to thank NCSL for once again giving us this opportunity to speak with your members and other people who are interested in the topics that you help us bring to both the public and your members. It's been an invaluable resource to really help us get information out and to a broad audience, a broad number of people who we really think need to hear what we have to say. So once again, thank you very much for giving us this venue and this chance. There we go. So I am going to just briefly talk about apportionment. What I can say, the fifth of an announcement that I can say is that people should expect the Census Bureau to announce today when the apportionment numbers will be released, and they will be released sometime next week. That's as far as I can go. But the announcement of the specific day for which those counts will be released for the states should come out today from the conversation I had just in the last hour. And when we're speaking about apportionment, just to reiterate a little bit, I know we've talked about this many times, but this is just the state population totals. It's going to have the resident population count and the federally affiliated count overseas. Those are combined to be able to create the apportionment totals for each state. And of course, this data set will not have disclosure avoidance applied other than aggregation. The data is aggregated to the states, and that is in and of itself a form of disclosure avoidance. So that's the only method there. The redistricting data, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and I'm also going to talk about the redistricting data in regards to the legacy format summary file that you may have heard of, or people may have heard of. I'm going to talk about that later. That's got geography that goes all the way down to the census block. It only uses the resident population, so it's the people who are resident in the United States at the time of the census. But that's going to give you your characteristics as well that you need. And this will be the first major data set from the 2020 census, and it will beyond apportionment, and it will have differential privacy applied, and Michael will talk about that. And we have this new bifurcated delivery timeline with a mid to late August for the legacy formats, and then follow-on materials in September. But as far as apportionment goes, the Census Bureau has already released one of our primary tools to get this data out. We have this interactive map, which includes certain types of data going from 1910 all the way through 2010, the number of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives each time, the changes to each state's number of seats in the House of Representatives, population per representative for each state, the resident population of each state, the percentage change in the resident population of each state, and then the population density. And you can download this data from the source table. There's technical documentation, and it also even works on mobile devices. It's actually optimized for mobile devices. And this will be one of the things that the Census Bureau will update with those 2020 numbers as soon as we make them available. The other thing that we're doing this decade that is something we've done in the past, but we've done it on a different timeline, is we're releasing operational metrics. Now these are, we've had a session where we talked about the 2020 census soon after we finished collection, where we talked about some of these operational metrics. So we had the self-response rate for the country, which is 67%. That's also been released down to the census tract level, and the links are going to be in the presentation that we'll share through NCSL. We had the total completion rates, which is the combination of the self-response rate and the non-response follow-up rate. We had the same for the area census offices, which is an even smaller area typically than by state. We had our overall national number for how heavily we used administrative records for enumeration. And then we also had our national proxy respondent rate, which of course came out very similar to what we had used in 2010. But we have some new information coming out. And what we can see with the new operational metrics that we'll provide soon after the apportionment numbers are released, for every address that we have in the census, we have to know whether it's real and livable, and whether it's vacant or occupied. And these April metrics will show the percentage of addresses that we determined to be occupied, vacant, or non-existent, and how that determination was made. So whether that was through self-response, whether that was through non-response follow-up or a group quarters operation, or was it unresolved and then it had to go through our imputation process. So during the non-response follow-up operation, when census takers were out there knocking on doors for folks that didn't respond, this effort was to try to get a response or to verify whether that address was truly vacant. And the April metrics will show the percentage of occupied addresses by how they were resolved, whether that was by the household interviews, so the non-response follow-up person actually got a hold of someone at the unit, whether it went to an administrative records enumeration, or whether they talked to a proxy, whether a building manager or a neighbor or someone like that. In addition to those, we're also going to provide the percentage of non-response follow-up vacant address and delete addresses. And these are going to be broken out by whether they were deleted by a proxy interview or by administrative records. So as I mentioned at the top, we have produced similar metrics before, but we're releasing these sooner to help build confidence. And we're also releasing these metrics at the state level in addition to the national level, whereas they would have typically been at the national level. So I'll leave the great big announcements around apportionment for when they announce the time today and when they actually announce the numbers next week. But I wanted to go into the redistricting data program as well here and kind of explain what's going on. I think that we've created a little bit of confusion with some of our language. We've created a little bit of confusion with the timing of how we made some announcements. And so I'm hoping to sort of pull this back and reset this so we're all working from the same set of knowledge. So the process that is occurring right now to create the redistricting data involves many different steps. The apportionment counts are only these state total population counts that are needed for apportionment. But for redistricting, as we mentioned, we have to get down into that small geography. We have to have the characteristics. And so the steps we're going through now are we're ensuring that all the records are coded to the most detailed level of geography. We're actually kind of blending between these two steps at the moment. We're moving into this conduct characteristic editing and imputation to ensure that each record has a valid value for major characteristics. And when we mean that by that is that if someone has entered a birth date of 1971, but they say they're 5 years old, we have to resolve that. And we have techniques and tools to do that. If someone says that they're married and their spouse is, they're 50 years old and their spouse is 5 years old, we have to resolve that. And we have techniques and tools to do that. So that's the stage that we're sort of moving into right now. After that, we have to make sure that we protect the data from possible disclosure of our respondents' information that they gave to us. And so that's that stage. Then we go through to tabulating the data. This is where we create it in all the different formats that people would expect to see, and a review is conducted at that stage. Then we take that data and we create physical media, and we load and test our web-based system that is the primary dissemination tool for the Census Bureau, and then we get that data out no later than September 30th. And so what are we delivering in September 30th? There's two primary things here. We have DVDs and flash drives that have an integrated software browsing tool to make it easier for the recipients of these DVDs and flash drives to access the data, to review the data. There's special extraction tools through just a couple of clicks that will allow the users to pull data off of those DVDs and flash drives into tables that they can then easily import into a geographic information system or a database. And these are what we deliver to the official recipients. So that would be the governors, the state legislative leaders, to several secretaries of states who have the role as a chief state election officer. And then there are nonpartisan liaisons to the redistricting program and a few others. So that's one of the items that's going out in September. The other is the Data Explorer web tool that I mentioned. That is our data.census.gov. This is the replacement for the American Fact Finder. And you can think of this almost like you'll hear me, if you hear me speak, you'll hear me describe this the same way quite frequently. As I think of it as like going to Amazon or going to Walmart, where you go in and you say you want a pair of pants, men's, blue, size. So you're just setting those filters. So in this tool, you can go in and you can say, well, I want the redistricting data, I want it for this geography, and I want this table. And it will narrow down your selections. It'll allow you to view your selections, the tables that meet your criteria. It'll allow you to map some of them, and then it'll allow you to download some of them. So this is going to be the primary way that the public will get that data. But we have this legacy format summary file. So knowing that this delay in the census data was creating issues and still is creating challenges for states that have to deal with redistricting and have their own timelines, both statutory and constitutional and otherwise. We looked back at our schedule and said, well, what can we do? Where is there a moment where we can provide something to provide at least some relief to this process? And if you look at this transition between the tabulate, review, all redistricting data in multiple formats, and then creating the physical media, there is the legacy format summary files. And if you've worked with census data in past decades, you would recognize these files. And I'll get into some specifics about their structure. But we recognize that those files will be ready and complete at that stage. And so we're going to release those files on August 16th or sooner. And these files were always part of the 2020 product plan. We were just going to hold them and release them with the other data products in September. So now we've made this recognition that they're needed and can be used. And so we're going to get those out earlier. We have been providing these to the states for a while. They do require some additional handling. That's sort of one of the downsides to these. They require a little bit of different handling and a little more intimate knowledge of the data and how it's organized to be able to extract data in familiar tables that people would expect to see. But it's fully reviewed and cleared for publication by mid to late August. We're saying August 16th as the no later than date. And this is the redistricting data, the PL 94-171 redistricting data. So people can use this with confidence to do their redistricting work. It will not change when we transform it into those platforms and physical media that I talked about before. It's actually the same data that we convert to create that integrated disk that we're going to send to legislators and governors as part of our official delivery. So physically, what are we talking about? We're talking about 4 pipe delimited text files per state. There's one file that we call it the geo header. It has all the geographic information for all 83 different possible geographies that we calculate for the census data. To make it easier to work with, we've added what's called a geocode field. This would mean something most likely for people who work with geographic information systems, which most state level redistricting is used and done in a GIS. And this geocode field will allow the data extracts that someone creates to easily join to the census shapefiles that we provided earlier this year. Then there's data segment 1, which has table P1 and P2. Which are the race and Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race tables. We have data segment 2, which has the voting age versions of those tables, plus a housing table, which will have the number of housing units by vacant and occupied status. And then this decade for 2020, we've added a third data segment because we've added a table to the redistricting data set for group quarters populations by group quarters type. So that'll be on data segment 3. These files have to be used together, at least the one data segment with the geo header has to be used together to be able to extract data. It's slightly different than 2010 in the sense that 2010 only had 3 files because we didn't have that third data segment. The geo header was fixed with, and the data segments were comma delimited. For simplicity's sake, this time we just did everything as pipe delimited. So we have made some of those minor modifications, but sort of philosophically, the structure is the same as what we've used before. I will fly through these. This is just an illustration of how you work with these files. The top table you see here is just a piece of the geo header. The bottom table here is a piece of data segment 1, and they have a common field. So each of these tables has a field that is the same in each table. And as you can see, they have individual unique identifiers within the two. So you just have to use your software to create a relationship between those two fields. If you want to ask a question, I'm using Rhode Island, so I'm asking a question about their townships. And the township summary level field is, summary level is the geography type, and the summary level field identifier for a township is 060. I get that from the technical documentation that we have posted online. And then I want total population, which is of course in the data segment. And I know that's field P0010001. So then you just select all records in the geo header that have that 060 while that relationship is maintained, and then say, give me the geocode field, give me the name field, which is off screen because that's a bigger file. And then it pulls the relevant records from the P001. And you end up with a table that looks more like something people would expect to get from the Census Bureau. So that's what we mean by a little additional handling. You have to be able to make that linkage between the tables, and you have to be able to make your query so that you're only pulling out and looking at the data that you're interested in. We're trying to provide as much support as we can. We had consultations with major software vendors. We talked to ESRI, we talked to Caliper, we talked to Citygate GIS, we talked to Election Data Services, we talked to Polydata to make sure that they all understood this format, and they all indicated that I think they felt comfortable with that. We've also talked to individual states to make sure that they felt comfortable. We've spoken to folks in California and Texas and Louisiana, and they all indicated that they do feel comfortable with this. And then we talked through NCSL, and we talked with some nonprofits that are out there doing work, such as the Redistricting Data Hub, who's going to process these legacy files, at least for the block level data. We have the technical documentation already posted. We have prototype data in the formats that the 2020 files will be available in, so people can work with those and practice with those for the importing and manipulation of that data. We have a header file where the headers that need to go along with the data are in an Excel format table that's posted online. People can just grab them out of there and pull them into their own software. We have a Microsoft Access database shell, which has table shells that people can pull this data into. And those shells will work with the prototype data that we've got and with the 2020 data once it's released. There's also example queries in there that people can look at to see how the structure and the logic works. And then a little later this year, we're going to have some SAS scripts that will allow you to import these data files as well into a SAS data set. We already have the geographic files up and ready, so people can be working with the shapefiles. They can be associating other data sources that they need to work with those shapefiles, so that all they have to do is append the census data once it's released. I already mentioned the prototype redistricting data. We also have a geocoding service, which has our 2020 address ranges. So if states have a responsibility to move people from one location to another based on a previous known address, they can use our geocoding service to try to identify the census location in which they need to move that person and create their adjustment tables in advance while they're waiting for the census data to be produced. And the way this is all going to roll out, the legacy format summary files will go up on our public file transfer protocol site, just a standard FTP site, by August 16th. That will be for both the states and the public. And then our user-friendly toolkits that we're calling them, the DVDs that will go to the official recipients, will be before September 30th. And then our Data Explorer web tool will also be before September 30th. And the Data Explorer web tool will be for everyone as well. And just a listing, I already went through who the official recipients of the data are there. And as a final indicator, this is just a cheat sheet to show you an easy way to get to some of these materials. If you go to census.gov/RDO, the prototype data I spoke of and the prototype assistance tools like the Microsoft Shell and things like that are in this redistricting data program management page. If you go to phase 3, which is data delivery, it's all listed there. And then the official data, like the official geography that's already out. And then once the official data is out, we'll have shortcut links into that Decennial census page. And then those of you who are also interested in our voting rights data, like Section 203 language determinations or the CVAP annual special tab that we do for the Department of Justice, is located through that voting rights tab. So you can come here as a central resource and access any of these data sets. We try to make it easy for you to find rather than having to scroll through the breadth of the Census Bureau website. And with that, I would just say thank you very much.
Well, thank you, James. That was just great for those of us who were following the census. It makes more sense every time you tell it to us. But I do want to come back to a few things you said and just clarify. One is, I think you said that the operational metrics will be available both at the national level and the state level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
The ones that will be released on just after the apportionment numbers will be at the state level.
Great. And then we also have had this question at the office a couple of times. What's the official date? I think you're going to say it's September 30th, but some states feel they need to know what's the official date because that's when they feel that they can start their map drawing.
So the August 16th date will be official PL 94-171 redistricting data. When I asked what are we considering the official delivery, that's going to be the DVD and flash drives that we send to the official recipients. So the Census Bureau is looking at the delivery of those DVDs and flash drives to the legally required recipients as our official delivery. But the data will be the same. So states should feel confident to start working with that August 16th data if they so choose.
Okay, love it. And then two more quick questions. Will this data be delivered to county governments or do they need to go to their state to get it?
They will be able to go to the Census Bureau to get it. Unless they're in a state that has a requirement like Maryland, where they'll modify the data to move people out of group quarters like prisons into alternate locations, in which case they have to create a new data set that the Census Bureau won't have available. But if they don't live in a state like that, then they can go directly to the Census Bureau and pick up this data.
All right, and one last question before we go over to you, Michael. Will the apportionment data release show both the resident and overseas population as separate numbers in addition to the apportionment population total?
Yes, they will. The table shells I've seen for that show it in 3 ways. They'll have the resident population plus the federally affiliated count overseas. Then there'll be a table with just the resident population, and then there'll be a table with just the federally affiliated count overseas. So you should be able to see it in all three ways.
Okay, we just got one more question in. I'm going to ask you this one while we're here because it's sort of a quick one. How much advance notice will the Bureau be able to provide to us before the release in August? Like, you know, are you going to pop it on a Friday afternoon with nothing said beforehand, or will we get a little notice?
I would like to be able to give notice. I don't want to say how far in advance at the moment. I've gotten in trouble for doing that in the past. But I'm sure as we get closer, we will continue to have conversations with both your members through NCSL and through any other venue we can find. And if the schedule has changed, we'll be certain to make sure that we're loud and we're clear about what has happened with that schedule change, whether it's for the better or for the worse.
Right. All right, James, thank you. Sit back, but please don't leave us. And everyone, we are almost at the bottom of the hour, and I do want you to know that at NCSL, we do not have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. So just breathe deeply, get yourself a little snack if you need it, and let's keep going. Michael, we know that differential privacy has been a hot topic for quite some time. When we first learned about it, there were a lot of drop jaws and confusion. I think you're going to be able to help us with the confusion part. And it got even hotter with the filing of the Alabama lawsuit. And so would you take it from there and share what you know about differential privacy? And then we'll see what questions we've got for you.
Sure, absolutely. And can you hear me and can you see my slides okay?
Look great, and you sound, and the slides look good, and we hear you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'll be giving, as you asked, an update on the status of our implementation of differential privacy for the 2020 census. I've given prior talks for NCSL where I've gone into a lot more of the specifics of what differential privacy is. So I'll be kind of just giving some of the highlights of that, and then I'll give some recent updates and some coming attractions for you. Really quickly, I want to acknowledge my coworkers at the Census Bureau have contributed to this and express the standard disclaimer that any opinions or viewpoints today are entirely my own and do not represent the Census Bureau's opinions or viewpoints. So data stewardship is absolutely critical to the Census Bureau's mission to produce high quality statistics about the nation's people and economy. And our ability to protect the privacy of our respondents and the confidentiality of their data helps us collect higher quality data for the census and for our other surveys and censuses. And this commitment to data stewardship is a legal obligation for us under sections 8B and 9 of Title 13. But more importantly, it's really a core commitment, a core component of our institutional culture at the Bureau. And throughout the Census Bureau's history, over the past 100 years, the Census Bureau has really been at the forefront of the design and implementation of an array of statistical methods that are used to safeguard respondent privacy. And over the decades, as we've increased the number of data tables that we release or the detail of those data products, and as privacy threats have grown, we have continuously improved the statistical techniques that we use to protect those data. Our adoption of differential privacy for the 2020 census is merely the latest in this long history of continuous improvement. So what is differential privacy? Well, it's important to stress that differential privacy is not a disclosure avoidance method, the same way that you could think of table suppression or data swapping as a disclosure avoidance method. Instead, it's better to think of it as a framework for defining and then quantifying privacy protection or privacy risk. We know that every individual that's reflected in any statistic that we publish contributes towards that statistic's value. We also know that every statistic that you publish inevitably is going to leak a minuscule or small amount of private information in the process. Thus, if you release too many statistics with too high a degree of accuracy, eventually you're gonna violate people's privacy protections. Differential privacy as this framework allows us to assess each individual's contribution to each statistic that we publish. And by assessing that contribution, we can measure and then limit how much information about any particular respondent gets leaked in the process of publishing our data products. So when you combine this framework, this quantifying framework of differential privacy with disclosure avoidance methods like noise injection, differential privacy allows you to precisely control the amount of privacy risk, the amount of disclosure risk that accrues in your published statistics. And some of the really attractive features of differential privacy as this framework is that it's infinitely tunable. It has a number of parameters or dials, you can think of them, that can be set anywhere on that spectrum from perfect privacy on one side to perfect accuracy on the other. The guarantees that differential privacy affords are mathematically provable and they're future-proof. So we don't have to worry about what privacy threats might arise tomorrow after we've released the data, so to speak. And the precise calibration of the noise that you inject through this process enables for an optimal degree of data accuracy for any given level of privacy protection. So what does all this mean for the 2020 census? Well, our adoption of differential privacy does not change our constitutional mandate to apportion seats for the House of Representatives according to the actual enumeration. We will not be injecting any noise into those state level tabulations, as James mentioned a few moments ago. As in 2000 and 2010, the Census Bureau will be applying privacy protections to the PL 94-171 redistricting data and the other Census 2020 census data products. Only this time around, we'll be using that differential privacy framework of noise injection instead of the data swapping method of noise injection that we used for prior censuses. Now, the switch to differential privacy does require us to reevaluate the quantity of the statistics and tabulations that we'll be releasing. Thus, some of the subsequent data products that you'll be seeing for the 2020 census, like our demographic and housing characteristics files, may look slightly different than their corresponding files from prior censuses. And if you want to learn more about those differences, you can just search 2020 census data products at the census.gov website. So, turning to updates, what have we been doing recently? Well, over the last several months, the Disclosure Avoidance System team at the Census Bureau has been conducting over 600 full-scale runs of the top-down algorithm, which we'll be using for the redistricting data. And we runs.
Michael, I want to interrupt you for just a moment.
Sure.
Your audio is kind of coming in and out, and I don't know what you're doing that might be shifting it, but if you could just be either really loud or hold that up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Apologies for that. I will try to speak more directly into my microphone. Yes. It might be my internet connection too, in which case there's not much I can do about it, but let's see if this works. So as I was saying, since December, we've been conducting over 600 full-scale runs of the top-down algorithm, which we're using to protect privacy for the redistricting data. And we've been conducting those experimental runs in order to tune the algorithm to meet particular and precise accuracy targets that we've established for the Redistricting and Voting Rights Act use cases. And our goal in doing this is to evaluate the resulting accuracy of varying the different dials or parameters of the system in terms of allocation of the privacy loss budget across geographic levels, varying the set of tabulations that we're taking noisy measurements of or the strategy that we're using for those, allocation of the privacy loss budget across those noisy measurements, and the overall setting of the privacy loss budget, which, as I mentioned before, determines where you fall on that spectrum between perfect privacy at the one extreme to perfect accuracy at the other. And we've been working very closely with subject matter experts in our demographic and decennial directorates, as well as external stakeholders, to evaluate the accuracy of these experimental runs to inform that parameter setting. And the results of these will inform the final decision-making about the parameters for the 2020 census redistricting data that will be set in June of this year. So demonstration data. I know many of you have looked at the demonstration data that we've released to date. So far, we've released 4 sets of demonstration data products for our data users to evaluate. Those came in October of 2019, May of 2020, September of 2020, and November of 2020. All 4 of those demonstration data releases used a very conservative privacy loss budget that was set by our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee for that first release. And So a low privacy loss budget puts you more on the end of the spectrum towards perfect privacy, which means that there would be less accuracy in the resulting data. I want to stress that the 2020 census data products in general and the PL 94-171 redistricting data in particular will not be held to this fixed PLB that was used for those 4 sets of demonstration data that have been released to date. By April 30th of this year, so next week, we plan to release another set of demonstration data using a different privacy loss budget, in this case an epsilon of 12.2. And this higher privacy loss budget will more closely approximate the level of privacy loss budget that DCEP will be considering for the actual production runs of the 2020 census redistricting data files. Then later in September, we plan to release a final set of demonstration data using the 2010 census, using the actual production code and settings that will be used for the 2020 census redistricting data file. And this will allow data users to assess what the anticipated level of accuracy and fitness for use of the actual 2020 redistricting data will be. If you're interested in learning more about these topics, I highly suggest you check out our disclosure avoidance on the 2020 census website. We have a lot of useful information there. You can also sign up for our data products newsletter, where we every couple weeks we provide new information about updates to our disclosure avoidance system and other related information. And if you have questions or suggestions or feedback for us relating to our adoption of differential privacy, you can send those to our 2020-DAS@census.gov email account. And with that, I will stop and take some questions.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate your willingness to share this kind of information with us. I do think it makes sense to say that there is a lawsuit that is predicated on the use of differential privacy. The hearing for that will be May 3rd. If you do get the emails that we send out from the redistricting distribution list, there's some information in it there. And the thing that struck me was that the people who are suing are asking for relief in the data coming out, all of the data coming out July 31st. You don't have to answer whether that's possible to do. I've heard before plenty of times that would take lots of extra time. So there's a lot that's uncertain there. So that's the word I'm thinking of when we come to this. But the question, there really is a question here. What is it that your decision makers will be thinking about in June as they set the privacy loss budget? What is it that they'll know in June that they didn't know in January or March or May?
Oh, thank you, Wendy. That's an excellent question. So the demonstration data that we're going to be releasing next week will reflect a lot of changes that we've made to the disclosure avoidance system since that last set of demonstration data that we released last November. In particular, as I mentioned, it will reflect a lot of the parameter setting and tuning that we've done to meet those very specific accuracy targets for the Redistricting and Voting Rights Act use cases. But that said, there are a lot of uses of census data, and it's possible that the accuracy targets that we set don't necessarily capture all of those possible use cases for the redistricting data file. So we want to allow our data users and the broader stakeholder community to have a chance to evaluate these demonstration data that have been tuned to those accuracy targets and to evaluate that fitness for use for their particular uses and provide feedback on that to us that our decision makers on our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee can consider when they make then the final decision. So they might, in response to some of that feedback, realize, okay, we've hit these targets, the data are fit for use for X, Y, and Z use cases, but there was one particular use case that for some reason didn't get included in those accuracy targets that needs to be addressed. Perhaps we need to adjust those dials, if you will, to ensure greater accuracy for a particular statistic for a particular use case. So it's really, DCEP will be considering that feedback. They will be going through very closely the responses that we get to this new demonstration file to ensure that we're doing our best to meet the public's needs.
All right, we do have some more here. So if you could just hang tight, Nancy, we're going to do a few more that are specific on the differential privacy questions that we've got going here. This one I don't even understand. So could you first unpack it and then tell us what the answer is? Any tentative schedule for PPMFs for the subsequent DHC files? So first do the PPMFs again and then the DHC, and then is there a schedule?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and I usually include that in my slide, but I took it off in the interests of time. So there are multiple data products that get released with the decennial census, and the first of those, of course, is the redistricting file. The second batch will be our demographic and housing characteristics files, which are the successor files to the old SF1, as well as our demographic profiles. And then after those, there are subsequent data products, including detailed data on race, detailed ethnicity, the American Indian Alaskan Native detail file, and detailed householder characteristics. The demonstration data that we've most recently released and that we'll be releasing next week is limited exclusively to the redistricting data product. So it doesn't include any of the additional tables that make up the DHC release. We do intend to release demonstration data for the DHC that will help with parameter setting and tuning for those products. We don't have a firm schedule yet on when those demonstration data will be forthcoming, but we hope to be able to share that schedule in the very near future.
So a lot of what we're talking about here today does relate to scheduling. And you may have just answered this, but let me just ask again, that final demonstration product, I think you said that was coming in September. So first confirm whether that's true. And is it possible to have that release be closer to the legacy data release date?
So yes, so we have 2 releases of demonstration data currently scheduled. The first is the one that's coming out next week, which reflects the tuning that we did most recently. The second will accompany the official redistricting data in September. And the goal for that is to release a demonstration product that exactly replicates the parameters and settings that were used to produce the 2020 redistricting file. As I mentioned, that is currently scheduled for September. I don't know if there's a possibility of having that move earlier to come alongside the August 16th release in the legacy format. As I said, currently our schedule is pointing to September, but I'll bring that back and we'll see what we can do.
On that, I'm going to take the great leap that everyone on the call would be very delighted if that were able to come earlier. If I'm wrong, you can stick it in the chat. Now, 2 yes/no questions. Will the housing and tenure tables be released in the PL94 files? Housing and tenure.
So James knows the structure of the PL file better than I do, but my understanding is the only housing tables that are included in the PL file is the H1 table, which just includes occupied and vacant at the block level. James, is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct.
And what will be the lowest level of geography that will be held invariant? I think the answer is the state. Is state the lowest level of geography that will be held invariant? I don't hear any.
You're muted, Michael.
That's strange. I didn't mute myself, so something happened. The list of invariants for the redistricting data product is total population at the state level, number of housing units at the block level, and number and major type of group quarters facilities at the block level. So population count at the state level, and then group quarters and housing units at the block level.
All right. So we do have a couple more questions, but what I'd like to do is move to Nancy now. As I started out saying, we're mostly talking about the deadlines and we're talking about the differential privacy, but there are lots of other ways that we can look at data quality. And I will come back at the end for the other questions. I'm not trying to leave anybody off here. So Nancy, with that, could you just take it away, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Wendy. So just by way of background, the American Statistical Association Task Force on the 2020 Census Quality Indicators was established last August. It was really a result of of 4 former Census Bureau directors and 2 former chief statisticians, myself included, calling for an independent panel of experts to review the quality of the census. And if you can transport yourself back to last August, there was a lot going on in terms of when data collection in the field would stop, whether the numbers would come out by December 31st and what shape they would be in, and all kinds of questions on differential privacy and other things. And so it was very, very important that there be an objective outside look at the quality. And so the American Statistical Association convened a task force, and our first report came out in October. And that report is available on the ASA website. It's amstat.org, amstat.org. And it had recommended quality indicators, things that we thought were very important to be looked at in order to assess the quality, both for the apportionment numbers and for the redistricting numbers. And we have been posting updates every 2 weeks on the ASA website on the progress that the experts are making in terms of assessing the data. Now, I will say that we've had great cooperation from the Census Bureau. You know, there's no permanent director at the Census Bureau right now, but since January, the career deputy director, who's been the acting director, agreed to allow the ASA to choose its own experts and to allow them on site and access to the census microdata to do an independent assessment of the quality of the data. So since January, we've also seen, I think, that the career staff at the Census Bureau has had the ability to be a lot more transparent about what they're doing, and has really made a big effort to, as I think James pointed out, do an unprecedented effort to put out their own quality indicators and to be more transparent about what they're doing. And there's blogs and a lot of background information that the Census Bureau itself has put up, which is very encouraging and certainly makes the task force more encouraged about at least being, you know, there's nothing right now you can really do about the quality of the data collection or that whole period, but at least understanding the data will be quite important. So we have 3 experts who are now, you know, virtually on site. I will say, though, that it took until last week for them to get any access to the data that they've been requesting. I don't think that that is due to bad intent on the part of the Census Bureau at all. I think it's just sort of, you know, the normal bureaucratic workings and the ability of the Census Bureau staff to provide data when they're in kind of their own time crunch to meet their self-imposed deadlines. So I can't really say a lot about the quality of the data right now. And, you know, with the data for apportionment being released next week and our ASA experts only very recently getting any access to the data, their first report, which deals with the state population totals, the apportionment data, will not be coming out simultaneously with the Census Bureau release or even the Census Bureau putting out their own quality indicators. We do not expect them to be able to, our experts, to be able to really put together a good comprehensive report until June on the quality of even the state population totals. So then the second report will probably be out in September, particularly if the data are ready earlier in order to come out with the August legacy data in mid-August. That means the data aren't changing and they should have access to it. So the second report is probably the one that will be the most interesting, because that will analyze metrics at a sub-state level and look at what happened at area census offices and in census tracts. and try to draw conclusions about sort of the relationship between what the metrics are showing and the different characteristics, demographic, socioeconomic characteristics in the census tracts. So, what they're looking to do is analyze the data before differential privacy is applied to it, to be able to really assess the quality of the underlying data, not what happened during the disclosure review process. However, I think that whatever results they come out with will probably have to be summarized in some way, because they will go through the Census Bureau's disclosure review process before they can put out any information. So I think what we're doing now is really thinking about what is meaningful, what can be summarized, what level of granularity we'll get through a disclosure review process, but still tell people what they want to know about the data, which I think will go beyond what the Census Bureau will put out in their quality metrics. Some of the things may be based on the same types of metrics. So that would be things really like looking at, how were cases resolved in non-response follow-up, what happened in post-data collection processing, what happened with group quarters, what happened in update leave areas, what happened with the master address file, these vacant deletes. But really going into probably more analysis of the meaning of this, particularly when it's looked at in the greater environment, like comparing different areas of the country that may have similar characteristics, or looking at effects that may have occurred in terms of natural disasters, hurricanes, all of the above. It's very hard, I think, to separate out pandemic effects in particular, but they will do the best that they can to get as much assessment of fitness for use for the user. So, looking at these questions of, hey, does the information in a census tract actually represent the people who live in the tract? Can you make decisions about public investment in infrastructure and public health, community investments, emergency readiness planning? What do the data look like in those contexts? Because you may require different levels of accuracy and granularity for that, but in some ways it's sort of looking at it from the standpoint of risk. So they're still looking at what kind of meaningful metric can people kind of look at even at a summary level by census tracts that will give them a sense of the quality of the data. And since they just got the data last week, I can't give you a firm answer on that, but that's the intent and where we need to go. And I think I do need to mention that my former co-chair on the task force, Rob Santos, is now the nominee to be the Census Bureau director. And I want to say a couple of things about that. One, I couldn't be happier, because he's also he'll probably have to resign, but president of the American Statistical Association, and he has been a great partner in Census Bureau accountability and working on the task force. The other thing that makes me very glad is because even though the experts on site have to work very closely with the people at the Census Bureau who are working with the data, I think Rob knows as well as anybody that this has to be an independent effort, that it has to happen in cooperation with, but separately from what the Census Bureau is doing, and that we are, as the American Statistical Association and the objective outside experts, under no obligation to agree with the Census Bureau on any of this. And Rob knows that. So I feel confident that when Rob hopefully is confirmed in the near future, that we'll continue to have the same level of cooperation and independence that we're experiencing now. I don't expect any change. I just expect more reinforcement of certainly of the independence and support for what we're doing. So I'll stop there. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, I'll stay on and be available.
Absolutely. What I want to say is that I'm getting the sense that first I compared you to a poet laureate, but now I want to compare you to a auditor. I mean, every institution has an auditor who comes in, and they have to be an independent auditor. Is there something? Is that comparison make any sense in this case, Nancy?
Well, so the duties of the chief statistician of the United States are actually set out in the Paperwork Reduction Act, but coordinating the federal statistical system and clearing all the surveys and the information collections that happen as part of the duties of the chief statistician, among many other things. So this isn't entirely foreign to me, but I don't know if you mentioned this, but I used to be the deputy director of the Census Bureau. So I have a very, I think, a lot of insight into how the Census Bureau works. And I was there during the 2000 census and at the Commerce Department during the 2010 census. So, and then I was deputy director during the early part of the decade for the planning for the 2020 census. So I think I have a good bird's eye view right now in order to assess this.
Great. The question is, will the review also include the work on PES? So first tell us what PES is, and then answer whether the kind of work that you're doing will include the work on PES.
The PES is the post-enumeration survey. So that's the small survey that's done to evaluate the quality of the census coverage, who got left out, basically. But the results of that, because it's been done so late, is not going to come out until 2022. So that will be long after the PL files are distributed. And, you know, all of us on this task force are volunteering our time. None of us have volunteered to do this through 2022. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we could continue, but we haven't made any decisions about that. But certainly the September, the second report is not going to include anything because the results won't be available.
Nancy, one more for you. And that comes from a person who is a retired SAS programmer and has worked with the Census Bureau in times past. What can you offer that you haven't already said, or maybe reframe what you've already said to assure this person that your arm's length analysis can show that the data was good, or where the places where it's less than good might be?
So the three experts are very, very familiar with census data and have looked at the quality of census data before. One is actually a former Census Bureau employee who's now at Westat. Another one, Joe Salvo, is the recently retired state demographer or city demographer for New York City, and has worked with Census Bureau data for decades. And the third, Paul Beamer, is at RTI and works all the time with census data. And what they're getting, you know, they've requested data in formats and tables that they want to use. And so the only thing that the Census Bureau is doing is providing the data, populating the tables for them, giving them the things that they're asking for, and explaining when anomalies are showing up or confusing things. So it is independent. They're not doing the same analysis. It's a separate effort. It's just Census is providing the data, and we're assuming it's, you know, the right data that they're asking for.
And I will say that when Christy sends out notes to the redistricting distribution list, she often includes things from your task force. So that's a place to look for more information on that, as well as, of course, on your own webpage. All right, Nancy, thank you very much. Hang in there in case anything else comes up. James, I've got 2 questions for you, and then I'm coming back to you, Michael, for several more, if that works for everybody. And I'm going to say we're going to be done by 1:10 Mountain Time, but we'll see. James, will there be an embargo for the release on the legacy data?
There will not. It will. Our capabilities for doing an embargo through an FTP release are limited. So we're going to just put it out there for both the states and the public.
Great, thank you. And then earlier this week on a press call, a Bureau person was asked whether the operational matrix data would be released at lower levels when the PL file is released. And that person didn't have an answer at that point. Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, that was Mike Bentley. He was talking about our ability to release those at lower levels of geography. That was something he had to take back and do research. I don't work on the quality metrics myself. I have to take information from them. So I would have to defer until Mike Bentley comes back with a response to that through the meeting that was held where he spoke.
Okay.
I don't know. I think what Mike was trying to say is we don't even know if it's possible to produce those data at lower levels of geography and still comply with our privacy protection requirements. So he was going to look into that.
Okay, we can follow up with you on that afterwards. I'm pretty sure that an answer a week from now or even 10 days from now would be good. Thank you. All right, Michael, you're up. There you go. How would differential privacy affect the quantity of data and the products? And Clark, we may have to bring you on if that's not enough for Michael to work off of.
No, absolutely. So I mentioned before that differential privacy provides this framework for quantifying and then limiting privacy risk or disclosure risk. And it serves as kind of an accounting framework. You could think of it that way. And so much like a monetary budget, you allocate shares of that budget to various things that you want. So you spend a little bit of that privacy loss budget with every statistic that you publish. And so the idea being this is a fixed budget that we'll be using for any given level of privacy protection. And so if you throw more privacy loss budget at certain statistics or certain tabulations or certain data tables, then you have less available for others. And so the idea and what I meant when I was talking about that it's caused us to reevaluate the quantity and the format of some of the statistics we'll be publishing, that's particularly relevant for the subsequent data products like DHC and the detailed race and detailed ethnicity data, that we've reevaluated the geographic levels at which we'll be publishing some tabulations and the disaggregations that we'll be doing to conserve privacy loss budget to ensure accuracy for the priority uses of census data. So that's what I meant when I said that the 2020 data products will look somewhat different than they have in the past. But we're still determining exactly what the structures of those subsequent data products will be, and we'll share information as it's available.
Now, the next question is, will the housing still be incompatible with the population data since they will be run through the algorithm separately, as was the case in the earlier demonstration products?
So, okay, another great question. So
that's people here.
Fundamentally, yes, they are run for the PL file and for the DHC. The housing units file and the person level file are run through the algorithm separately. That said, we have made a number of improvements in the recent tuning of the algorithm to enhance the accuracy of those housing tables. I think you'll see that we also boosted the privacy loss budget afforded to the H1 table in the new demonstration data we'll be releasing next week, up to 1.9 from 0.5 that had been allocated to it before. We will be providing detailed householder data and the person household join tabulations, but those will be coming in that subsequent batch of data products that we'll be releasing along with detailed race, detailed ethnicity. So for the really detailed and linked data on those, you have to wait for that next batch of data products.
Thank you. I've been hearing this concept of data privacy budget for quite some time now, and it finally crossed my mind that with my household budget or a state budget, there are two things you can do. One is you can change the total number of dollars you got by getting a second job or driving Uber, or you can reallocate within. So I'm guessing that there's no way to do the comparison of getting the second job to make that privacy loss budget larger, but that's set by something else.
Actually, that's not as strange of an analogy as you might think, because one of the things, so as I mentioned, the accounting aspect of differential privacy, the ability for it to account for privacy loss, allows us to be very precise about how we allocate the privacy loss budget. And what we can do is, it is possible to allocate larger shares of privacy loss budget while still protecting privacy if you do it in a mechanism that allows you to protect particular characteristics that might lead to greater disclosure risk, or that might be more harmful were they to be inferred or determined. So we have not established what the total privacy loss budget for the 2020 census will be. That number is still to be selected. Right now, our focus is on ensuring that we can meet the fitness for use targets for the priority uses of census data. And then when the final numbers are set, those will be set both with an eye towards those fitness for use requirements and the corresponding privacy protection for census respondents. And so yeah, your analogy is an interesting one, and it's not as off base as you might think.
Great, thank you, thank you. I want to reinforce something we talked about earlier, and that's about when the final demonstration data set will come out. We've heard you say it's scheduled for September. You've heard us say we'd much prefer to have it closer to the legacy output. Just James, I want to see nods head from both Michael and from James. You understand that would be great if you can move that schedule up. And now next question for you, Michael. Give us another quick review, please, of something that you started with, and that's the statement about the low privacy, high accuracy trade-off. And also, if there's a paragraph somewhere on the census website that's good for that, this person would like that, so maybe that could be popped in the chat box. We're looking for a reference here that could be used in classrooms or in other places to explain that trade-off between the two.
Sure. So I'll give the high level summary, and then once I'm done talking, I'll find you a link that I can drop into the chat. So anytime you release any data that's derived from a confidential data source, that release is going to carry some re-identification risk, some disclosure risk. The only way that you can absolutely, like 100% eliminate the privacy risk of a data release is to never release any usable data at all. And that's not an option for us. So you have to essentially think of what you're releasing as finding the optimal point on a spectrum between a privacy loss budget of 0, where you have perfect privacy and absolutely useless data, and a privacy loss budget of infinity, where you have perfectly accurate data with no privacy protections at all. And what you want to find is the point on the spectrum where you're releasing data that are sufficiently accurate for their intended uses, while also being sufficiently protected to meet the legal and ethical obligations to protect confidentiality. And so that point on that spectrum between those two extremes becomes where you set your privacy loss budget.
Right. Okay. And now I've got one more question for you, James. Sorry about that. I told you you were done, but you were not done. And that is, could you tell us a little bit about how deployed military are handled this year compared to 2011? And with a note from Hansi Lolong at NPR that there were 10 times as many of those folks 10 years ago as they are now. How are we handling them, the same or different? And does the fact that there's far fewer of them make a difference?
Right. So we collect information about the military serving overseas through the federally affiliated count overseas. So that's that second bucket of numbers that we talked about that goes along with the resident population to create the apportionment count. In our analysis of our resident situations and criteria that we went through leading up to the 2020 census, through a lot of consultations, both with folks who live and work around military bases, with the DoD itself, the decision was made to make a differentiation between when someone is deployed and stationed. So a person who's stationed overseas would be someone who gets an assignment. Like when I was growing up as a military brat, we would get stationed in the Netherlands. We had no idea where we were going to be there for years, and we had no idea where we were going to go when we came home. Whereas someone who's deployed is from a base, they get sent into a theater to do their work, and then they come back to their base. And so the military, through the records that they provided us, made that distinction as to whether someone was deployed or stationed. And then we took the deployed population and we put them into the resident population. So the deployed population doesn't show up in the federally affiliated count overseas now. The deployed population shows up back in the resident population. And so only those, the remainder, are who's counted in the federally affiliated count overseas.
Thank you, James. And there's also an explanation in the chat from Terry Ann Lowenthal, who, which you can all read and absorb in a different way, audio versus reading. That's it, guys. We have done what we came to do. Nancy, you were wonderful. I'm so pleased to get to meet you, and good luck with your, what I'm going to call your audit of what's going on at the census. Michael, thank you again for explaining stuff that's hard to explain and doing it well. And do keep us posted. You know, every time you do one of those newsletters about what's going on, Christy shares it on our redistricting distribution list. James, as always, a treat to be with you. And now we're all going to be sitting by our phones waiting to know when the data is coming next week. I'm going to guess it's at 4 p.m. Eastern. No, I'm going to guess it's at 5 p.m. Eastern, but who knows, who knows. So to everybody, I think, you know, I like to be in touch with lots of folks. So do keep asking your questions of us and get on that distribution list. And we'll see you again in another month or so. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Nancy, Michael, and James, why don't you stay on?